Hey everyone, and welcome to Serious Coin. This is the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. I'm your host, Kelly Willis Green, and I can't believe this is now season 6 of Serious Coin. And if you've been following us, you know that my guests and I cover just about every topic under the sun related to handling wealth. But if you're new to the podcast, let me give you a little of the background. I come to this subject honestly, and I'm very passionate about it. My own story is that I'm a money coach for affluent individuals, and I got here after 25 plus years working in private wealth management as a marketing executive. And in 2016, I married someone who's been financially successful, and I experienced firsthand the blessings and the challenges of that transition. And so in my work and in my life, I have seen that financial peace of mind is not correlated to net worth. It's about our relationship with our wealth. And let's face it, there is no rule book for handling it. And so rarely do we talk about it. And I want to change that because I think when we share our stories, we learn from each other. And so on this podcast, you hear the stories of interesting wealth holders and the advisors to them. And my goal is to help listeners be better prepared, more intentional, and optimized at handling significant wealth. And so this first episode of season 6, my conversation is with Matthew Fleming. And I think he's fascinating. There are so many interesting aspects to Matthew Fleming's life. Professionally, he is a partner at Stonehage Fleming, which is a multifamily office based in London. He is head of family governance and succession, which means he advises global families of wealth on how to pass on their legacies. But that's only one element of Matthew's story. He's been an officer in the British Army, an All England professional cricketer. And oh, by the way, his great uncle was Ian Fleming of James Bond fame. And it's not as if Uncle Ian was the most successful member of this prominent UK family. The Flemings founded the bank Robert Fleming Co. back in 1873. So there's this layered story of ancestral wealth that we discuss. In this episode, Matthew shares a wealth of stories about growing up in this extraordinary family and the path he took to his career today, which was not a straight line. He is thoughtful, he is generous with his insights, and he's refreshingly candid as he talked about pivotal moments as a young man and later as a parent. I started our conversation by asking Matthew what it was like growing up a Fleming.
It sort of felt pretty normal, if I'm honest. Obviously with the benefit of hindsight, I realized it wasn't, but we were quite a modest family in as much as we had this amazing family business for which we were reasonably well known. But, just because you have a family business doesn't make you wealthy. Mm-hmm. So we had many of the restraints that people don't associate with wealthy families now. So I didn't go abroad until I was a teenager. All our holidays were in Scotland. You'd load the dog on the boat engine into the back of the car and you drive up to the west coast of Scotland. It was, having roast beef, real treat. It was, it was just felt normal. One thing I would say is that I grew up understanding from a very young age that I wasn't the most important person. And that not only was I not the most important person in my family, but my family wasn't the most important family in the world. And that the business was probably more important than the family, but that the country was more important than the business. So I had a very clear, right from a young age, a clear hierarchy for decision making. So what was in the country's best interest came first. A lot of my family had been soldiers and I became a soldier. What was in the family business's best interest came second, because that was the source of everything from identity to wealth. What was in the family's best interest came third, and what was in my best interest came at the bottom of the pile. And that's a framework that has guided me throughout my life.
When you think about that framework, I can't help but wonder if we flipped it in today's world. I mean, you talk about country, family business, family self.
On its head.
Yeah.
And it's one of the great frustrations I have. And actually, it was without getting too parochial about it, it caused quite a conflict in my own nuclear family during COVID when, my instinct was to do what we were told.
Right.
And that was that the country required us to stay at home and didn't require my daughter to come and visit us every weekend just because she had to work for her business during the week. And my wife's view was absolutely, if my daughter wants to come home, she can come home whenever she come to the bosom of her family. So, even my wife, whom I share almost every value imaginable, family came before country and before business. And I look around at many of the next generation who we work with today, and I'm saddened by the fact that self is right at the top of the tree now.
When you talk about values, I'm wondering who it was in your family that embedded these, because we've talked a few times and the values really come through every time I speak with you. Who or what was most influential?
It was all lived. It was both my parents. Absolutely, both my parents were remarkable people. My father, annoyingly, turned out to be almost always right about everything, but was this very wise gentleman whose life was underpinned by service and duty. My mother was the youngest of 6 children. She was the only girl, and her life was underpinned by service and duty. And we lived pretty modestly at that time. Things have changed subsequently. We live a more overtly successful life now, but at that time we went by bus to the local school like everyone else did to start with. We were very, very grounded. And it was all examples set by my parents and my grandparents.
In money coaching, we talk a lot about the early messages we receive around money in our families of origin and just how influential they become in our adult relationship with money. What messages about money specifically do you remember as a child?
That it was to be respected. So my father was very cautious. I can remember him coming to dinner, and he went to the office every day and didn't get home till about 7:30. And I remember him coming down to dinner one evening, and he opened a bottle of champagne, which is very unlike him. And we said, "What are we drinking to?" And he said, "I'm debt free, and I will remain debt free for it." So we were brought up that debt was a bad thing. It was a necessary evil. But if you borrowed money, you paid it off as quickly as you could. When you didn't have to borrow money, you didn't borrow. And I think that in many ways has hindered me, because I've watched my contemporaries use leverage much more imaginatively than I have. But I cannot help but feel those my earliest lessons, I am allergic to debt. And then the other thing that he did from the teenagers, we had formal family meetings with an agenda, with a wealth manager. And so item 1 used to be, and then we'd get to item 4 or 5, and all the advisors would leave the room. And item 6 would be mum. So what's on mum's mind? What does she want to talk about? Item 7 would be us 4 boys. What's on your minds? How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Then any other business, then out. So those are the 2 things I remember most clearly. One, be nervous of debt, and 2, there's no harm in formalizing meetings. There was a formality around wealth that was created that meant there was no excuse for not talking or understanding or asking questions.
It makes me think a little bit of that. You've probably heard the same anecdote I have about David Rockefeller, who grew up in what he felt were very modest circumstances and was oblivious to his family's wealth. And it wasn't until a classmate said to him, "Your family's rich." And he even disagreed with them.
Yeah.
He didn't know, he didn't feel rich. Was there a moment when you knew your family had means?
So I realized we had means when I realized, first of all, that we were a well-known family before I realized we were a family of means. Fleming's was this wonderful merchant bank, this multi-generational institution that sat at the heart of the city of London, which was a very different place now, still dominated by families in the 70s, by old firms, multi-generational firms. It had a footprint in Asia and a footprint in America. And I became aware as I went through school, I was lucky enough to go to a school called Eton. So I became aware that Fleming was a name that brought with it certain expectations and certain understanding. And that still didn't feel like wealth to me. And I guess it probably didn't feel like wealth until 2000 when the business was sold. We went from being a business-owning family to a family of quantifiable wealth. I played cricket for a living, and I was away playing cricket for my county at a place called Old Trafford in Manchester against a team called Lancashire when news of the sale broke. And I remember one of my colleagues walking past my table at breakfast and dropping the Telegraph on my table, which was open at the business pages, and the headline was Fleming sell for whatever the number was, 4 point something billion. And then there was a photograph of me playing cricket, and it said Matthew Fleming owns an unspecified amount of the business. That was the first time that there was a number, and that it was out there that, I was a shareholder in this business.
Did it change the relationship with that teammate or teammates?
Well, funny enough, no, because in relative terms, I'd always been relatively wealthy in comparison to them. But because I had started at the bottom and I'd earned my way up, and sport has got nothing to do with it doesn't matter whether you've got £1,000 or £1 million in your current account when you go out to represent your country. If you fail, if someone else is better than you, or you make a mistake, sport is brutal. So I had earned the right to be me, not to be the person that the paper thought I was.
Matthew's path to success in both sports and business wasn't exactly a straight shot. I asked him to take me back to his school days at Eton College, where he had been, in his own words, a pretty unremarkable student. And yet, as the eldest of 4 boys, there was probably an unspoken expectation that one day Matthew would take over the family business. But that all changed the day his father sat him down for a decisive conversation.
I remember it very clearly because it was probably the single most important conversation I've had in my life. And I wasn't a very intelligent pupil at school, and not only was I not very intelligent, I actually didn't engage with school. I engaged with sport at school, but not with the academic side of school, which is one of my great regrets in life, because I went to this amazing school and I look at the caliber of teacher and learning opportunities I had, and I was such an immature young man. Anyway, my father, when my exam results came through, my father called me into his office and said, he was massively understated and said, slightly disappointing results. He said, I think it would be good if one of my sons worked in the family business, and it should probably be the most intelligent. And that clearly isn't you. And but he said it in a gentle, it doesn't sound gentle because I haven't told it very well, but he said it in a very gentle way. And what I now realize he was saying to me is, I understand that you are not the right person to join the business now, and the business is not the right business for you to want to join. So I'm giving you the license to go away, figure out what gets your pulse racing, figure out what you're good at, succeed or fail on your own 2 feet, get some self-respect, because you cannot be respected if you don't respect yourself. Now, I only realized this with the benefit of hindsight. And actually, I tried to thank him for it, but I left it too late. My father had dementia quite really badly, and we didn't realize how bad his dementia was until it was too late. So I left it too late to thank him for that. But I hope that at some level he heard me. It was a massively important conversation, and I have to thank him for it, because my life has taken the most amazing course.
Whether you identify as the parent or the child in that scenario, I think we can all agree what a brave conversation it was. And Matthew didn't immediately heed his father's advice. He says he was an immature 18-year-old enjoying life. But a turning point was when his mother went to the local employment center and found Matthew a summer job as a forklift driver in a factory. And although Matthew's real dream was to play cricket professionally, at the time he was told more than once that he wasn't good enough. But this roadblock led to yet another growth opportunity.
So my fallback position was to do a short service commission in the Royal Green Jackets, the British infantry, to go through Sandhurst and become an officer in the British Army. And my grandfather had been killed in the war. My father had been a soldier through national service. And I think he understood that for someone who wasn't clever enough to go to a top university, actually the next best thing for a young man like me was to be commissioned into the army and grow up and learn about leadership, about man management, about time management, about self-respect, about communication, about clarity of thought under pressure, and all those things. So I ended up in the Royal Green Jackets.
And then later as a professional cricketer playing for England.
Yeah, so when my commission ran out, I toyed with the idea of trying Special Forces selection, but was told in no uncertain terms that whilst I might have had the physical qualities, I didn't have the mental strength to be a special services soldier, and they were right. But what I did have is I did have a really dramatically matured perspective on life and pressure. So whilst I hadn't got better as a cricketer in the 5 years I'd been away from cricket, I was 80% as good as the best players, but under pressure, I could produce 100% of my 80%. Whereas under pressure, those people who were 100% better than me could only produce 60% of their 100%. So I was better under pressure than other people.
Was it the military that taught you that?
Entirely. In the military, if I made a mistake, people died. In cricket, if I made a mistake, we lost a game.
Right.
This gives you quite a broad perspective.
Yeah. Now, you eventually did join the family business in 2012. And isn't it ironic that today you are head of family governance and succession? I mean, talk about coming full circle.
It is ironic. I'm not very good at management, but I'm quite good at leadership. I'm not very good at numbers, but I'm quite good at family. I'm not very good at lots of things, but I'm quite good at communicating and encouraging others to have brave, meaningful conversations. And I'm the father of 3 daughters.
Right.
Which has given me a really interesting and important insight into life through a different lens, because my life had been entirely male dominated up until they came along. So I feel as though I'm quite rounded when it comes to family, and I'm quite rounded when it comes to leadership. So when I joined the business and I'd retired from cricket, I stopped before I had to. I probably could have gone for another 2 or 3 years, but I'd asked my father for some advice on, how do you end a career and when do you end? And he just said, look, it's not for me to tell you when to end a career, but one thing to bear in mind is you should always leave a restaurant slightly hungry. And it was a brilliant piece of advice.
And you have said that part of the intellectual capital you bring is the collection of all these experiences and what your family has done, some of the things you've gotten right, and some things that might be a cautionary tale of others. So I want to ask you, do you have 1 or 2 examples that would be important for people to know about what to do right, what your family's done right?
So, round pegs in round holes. Get the right members of the family doing the right roles. Don't compromise. And if the family is not the right person for the job, find the right non-family member to do the job, even if it's leadership or not. So that's critical. We were guilty of too many compromises, I think. When I look back, we tried to be nice to too many people, and being nice doesn't equal being successful and doing the right thing by the wider family. Secondly, after we sold the business, we gave a huge amount of thought to the structuring of the family and the structuring of the sale and the exit. But I don't think we gave enough thought to the family itself and the spotlight that would be shone on the family, and the fact that the business itself played a much bigger role in the purpose of the family than we'd appreciated. So when we came to repurpose ourselves for the family office, the establishment of the family office, there wasn't absolute clarity about what the family's purpose was and what the purpose of the family office was to support it. So I guess the next key lesson would be spend time reflecting on the purpose of your family and your family's wealth, because that is the foundation for any framework for decision making. If you don't get that right, it's impossible for anything else to flow from it. And then leadership. Family leadership is absolutely critical. And unless you have an exceptional person, it's very hard to lead a family in all aspects of a family's life, whether it be its financial capital, its social capital, its cultural capital, its intellectual capital. It's very hard to be a brilliant entrepreneur and a brilliant custodian of wealth at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to be a guardian of a set of family values.
So with leadership and round pegs and round holes, I can't help but go back to that conversation with your father, not to keep revisiting that. I'm going to have you in therapy after this episode. But what would you advise a parent who's in a similar situation then, how to approach that difficult conversation?
Well, it's really interesting. So I don't think every family is capable of having that conversation. And so first of all, recognizing whether or not you're the right person to have that conversation is critical. Just because you're the father or the mother doesn't mean you are the best person to have that conversation. Sometimes you can outsource a problem and find someone who can help you solve it. So if it's not you, don't be embarrassed about finding help.
The right person, someone who's got a different relationship with the person.
Yeah. It could be a godfather, it could be an uncle, it could be someone who isn't a family member, Secondly, I probably see as many families who over-promote as they do under-promote. So I don't think it's a particularly British thing, but that thing about, my son or daughter's not nearly good enough, and in fact, we're sitting there going, your son and daughter are really remarkable young people, and with the right guidance and support, they could be brilliant, leaders. So sometimes our role is to encourage families as often as it is to say, funny enough, your son or daughter is not as good as you think they are. So there's that. But I think it's an odd conversation to have out of the traps. I think if it's the first time you've broached anything like this, then it's not an easy conversation to have. But so one thing I think my father did very well is raise subjects gently throughout our teenage years and let us reflect on them. And I probably didn't realize he was doing it at the time, but he did. So that when we came to have various bigger conversations, it wasn't a complete shock. It was okay, this makes a little bit of sense now, because I remember he used to have conversations with me when we were walking.
Right.
When we were on the holiday on the west coast of Scotland. And that it's such a lovely way of having a conversation, because you don't have to look at each other.
Yes. Cars are the same.
Yeah. So there's a strategy and a tactic to these conversations, sow the seeds for them, but then it'll pick your moment and have the conversation in as neutral a way as possible, so it doesn't become a conflict.
Sowing the seeds for these essential conversations is exactly what Matthew and his team help families navigate every day. And one of the tools they use is Stonehage Fleming's 4 Pillars of Capital report. It breaks wealth into 4 different kinds of capital. Financial capital refers to the assets that support lifestyle and growth. Intellectual capital focuses on knowledge, skills, and education. Social capital encompasses relationships, reputation, and contributions to society. Cultural capital includes shared values, traditions, and identity. So, looking at these four pillars, I asked Matthew for his thoughts on how parents can raise children to lead fulfilling, meaningful lives while at the same time being cognizant of this very privileged position they're in. His answer included a powerful story about a teachable moment he experienced with his own daughter.
So I think with children, each of them respond to different pillars of capital in different ways. So maybe pick the least controversial pillar of capital to start discussing first, and maybe that's social capital. Maybe you can start that conversation a little bit younger, because that's reputation. That might be, it might be anything as sort of binary as a social media strategy. You know, we have a reputation. Our business is built on our reputation. Our holidays, our lives are built on the business. You know, and that. So the way we behave is important. And so you can start the conversation around that. Or it can be a philanthropic discussion. It's important to share our good fortune with those less fortunate, or causes. Let's start the conversation around philanthropy, and then that can lead to other conversations. I'm quite keen when children are young in sort of offsetting, coming from a slight tangent rather than the full frontal assault of what are you going to do?
Right.
How are you going to appreciate the situation being born in, you know, blah, 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 blah. I'm keen that is a consequence of conversations rather than the core focus to start with.
And sometimes that becomes, parents have a greater sense of urgency because they are concerned that their child is not on the right track. Maybe those things didn't happen when they were younger, and now there's some corrective action.
But also don't forget, your teenagers will be teenagers. Mm-hmm. You know, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to embarrass you. They're going to let themselves down. They're going to let each other down. There's going to be alcohol. There's going to be a party they shouldn't have gone to. There's going to be a flunk test. You know, they are young people. They're designed to make mistakes. Yeah. And we talk a lot with the next generation, with the families that we work with, around the importance of making mistakes and failing. You know, the education system in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same around the world, is designed to help you pass things. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily understand or love them, pass them. Mm-hmm. So you don't experience failure.
And we learn far more from our failures than our successes.
Absolutely. I love getting a call from, you'll never guess what my child's done now. You know, I had a great call from my wife, and my daughter will kill me for telling you the story. But I had a great call from my wife when my youngest daughter was 15. And I knew something was up because she said, you'll never guess what your daughter has done now. And when it's my daughter, that's not good news. And I was really busy. So I said to her, well, if it doesn't involve the police, can you deal with it? And she said, well, stay on the line. I went, oh, God. Oh. and, you know, it had been a classic teenage girl, fake tan, shoplift sort of thing. Uh-huh. And I was apoplectically cross because it was a values-based mistake rather than anything else. Actually, it was interesting. She and a friend were caught shoplifting. Mm-hmm. And the friend's parents went into lockdown. They complete denial. No one said anything about it. It was as if it hadn't happened. And my wife and I made our daughter write to the manager of the shop, her grandparents, her uncles and her aunts, and her godparents, saying, I don't want you to hear this from anyone else, but I've got something badly wrong. Mm-hmm. And so she had to write 16 or 17 letters. And I could hear families around the world thinking, oh, my God, you're so cruel.
No.
But she got 15 letters back out of the 16 saying, it's very courageous of you to, of course, you've been an idiot, but it's courageous of you to write. You are judged more on how you respond to, you know, et cetera, which was brilliant. And the best letter was from my youngest brother, who's a fantastic character, who wrote a letter to her saying, Dear Tilly, next time you're out, could you get me a pair of size 11 Nikes? which was the perfect letter from the wicked younger uncle. It was, she'd had all this preaching from the rest of the family, and just a gentle reminder that, you know, keep smiling. You know?
Keep things in perspective. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
I'm forever grateful to all of my family for responding in the way that they did, because they all played their role to perfection.
Speaking of your family, I just want to do a bit of a turn, because I think listeners would be very interested to know Another fascinating aspect of your family is that your great uncle was Ian Fleming,
Yes,
the man who gave us 007.
absolutely.
And, you think about that. I'm hard pressed to think of another global franchise that has been as successful as it has been. I think the first movie was 1961. So still so modern, so successful, and very, very public. And yet he was a family member
Yeah.
growing up in a family. I don't think you knew him.
He died when I was very young. He died when I was very young.
But I'm wondering, what was the view inside the family of Ian Fleming, and where did he fit into this sort of very prominent finance business family?
Yeah, I mean, look, he was a very significant member of the family. He was one of four brothers who were the sons of the eldest son of Robert Fleming, the founder of the business. And there were four boys. There was Peter Fleming, who died on the family's place in Scotland, and there's a little plinth where he died. Peter Fleming, soldier, author, explorer. And I think as a young man, wow, soldier, author, explorer. Phew.
Yeah.
So he was a heroic figure in our family. Then there was Ian, who is a heroic figure in our family. But also, to one or two, people go, when they read the stories about Ian and his, some of his characteristics, people go, oh, okay, brilliant writer, but
Infamous as well as famous, can we say?
absolutely, yes. And then there was Richard Fleming, who ran the family business, who's just universally loved. And then my grandfather, Michael, who died in the Second World War, as his father had died in the First World War. So, in a funny way, you have the embodiment of the sort of everything that could happen, the ultimate sacrifice, people who remind us of the importance of country ahead of business, ahead of self. Yet you had the family member who ran the family business, one of the four boys, so the right man doing the right job. And then you had the other two who were enabled to go out and do their thing, and they did their thing incredibly well.
How did the family decide who would work in the business and who would go out and do their thing as Ian became Ian?
Do you know what? I genuinely don't know, and no one's ever been able to tell me. And I think in those days it was just different. If you wanted to work in the business, you did. And I think where we got lucky is that the one that really wanted to work in the business was good at it. I didn't come back into the family business until I was 37. You know that I've referred to my life and that of other families as sort of sitting in a car.
Yes. Tell my listeners about that, because I have quoted you on this, but you do a much better job.
Well, I'm sure I don't, but I like the analogy of sitting in the car. And if I spend my whole life looking backwards in the rearview mirror about what has gone before, I'm going to crash. If I spend my whole life looking forwards, I forget about where I've come from, and I may lose my sense of direction. So I want to spend most of my time looking forwards, but I want to regularly check in the rearview mirror to check where I've come from and to check everything's all right behind me, and be respectful of what has gone before and my legacy. And my grandfather paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we're free to do what we're doing now and be entrepreneurs and businessmen and family members. So it's right to look forwards and backwards. But what we also say to young family members is, if you should also look in your wing mirrors occasionally, because sometimes the best opportunities are off to the right and left. And there's a brilliant man over here called Jamie Nalder Pinkerton, who worked as a private secretary to Prince William and Harry and helped guide them through their youths, and did the most wonderful job. And he says life is a series of waypoints, but don't get too caught up on your route between each waypoint. And sometimes if you get so focused about only looking forwards and overlooking backwards, you miss the most interesting route to your next waypoint. So, of course, look forwards a lot in the car, because otherwise you'll crash. Of course, keep looking in the rearview mirror because you want to remember where you've come from. But also check left and right occasionally, because that's often where the interesting opportunities sit. And my bit of the car, the family governance and succession, is sort of the seatbelt and the steering wheel,
I love that. Really paints a picture. This has been absolutely delightful. And I just before we wrap up, it's time for that rapid fire section of our conversation where just to get a glimpse into some candid insights you might have into your personal relationship with wealth.
Okay.
So I've just got a few questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Can you name one disadvantage to being born into intergenerational wealth?
For me, no, but I know others will say that the disadvantage is that sometimes you don't get a chance to figure out your true self.
What do you hope your children will understand about money?
I hope they will understand that it enables and it gives you opportunities, but it is not to be taken for granted.
What is one thing most people would say you spend a disproportionate amount of money on?
I spend too much money on garden machinery.
All right. And what is one thing you underspend on?
Well, my wife would say the heating.
That's why I love these questions. Finish the sentence for me. To me, money is?
I find this a very, very hard question to answer because it depends what time of day it is and what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, money is opportunity and choice.
Lastly, and you know I have to ask this.
Yep.
Do you like your martini shaken or stirred?
I don't like martinis.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
I feel as though I've let you down badly, but I genuinely don't.
Good.
I've tried very hard, but I don't like martinis.
Well, I concur with Matthew on martinis. Although here's a tip for listeners. Matthew and I agreed the place for martinis in London, and probably the world, is Duke's in Mayfair. They prepare them tableside, and it's where the classic martini was born, and also where Uncle Ian could sometimes be found at the bar scribbling notes for his James Bond novels. I want to thank Matthew Fleming for being my guest. There were so many memorable stories and insights. I just loved talking to him, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And if you did, please share it. That's why we're here. And if you'd like to receive a copy of Stonehage Fleming's 4 Pillars of Capital report, there's a link in the show notes, or you can reach out via their website, stonehagefleming.com. Thanks for listening. We have more rich conversations about wealth coming up this season, so please make sure you're subscribed to catch them when they drop. I'm Kelly Willis Green, and you've been listening to Serious Coin Podcast. Serious Coin is provided for your general interest only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment, tax, legal, or other professional advice. Always talk to a licensed professional before you make any financial, legal, or investment decisions.